Between 1986 and 2011, over 1,000 religious minorities have been charged under the provisions of the blasphemy law in Pakistan. Some have faced fates worse than others. Some have been murdered extrajudicially before they've even had the chance, in accordance with the right to due process, to defend themselves before a court of law. Whether this was Mishal Khan or this was the Christian couple that was thrown into a brick kiln, these instances are very real, and they're a terrifying reality that exists in our society. In other circumstances, where extrajudicial murder doesn't take place, people are kept in jail for years on end. There have been cases where people have been kept in jail for a period of 8 years, for a period of 10 years, and then finally released. Even though once they are released, they have to seek asylum elsewhere, because living in Pakistan with an allegation of blasphemy hanging over your head is not a possibility. There are certain things when we talk about the blasphemy law, which is something that we must talk about, that we need to discuss. First and foremost, and this is perhaps the most important issue surrounding this discussion, is the lacking mens rea requirement and the lacking evidentiary threshold. I've made a video on the same YouTube channel about the origins of the law and how Ziaul Haq removed the intent and evidence requirement from these provisions, which has resulted in my word against yours scenario, where I'm sure we all know quite fully by now that if today I don't like your face, I can get up and accuse you of blasphemy, and there will be absolutely no due process. There will be no opportunity for you to even clear your name, because the most likely circumstance and scenario is that you will be killed before this case can even go to trial. So this first issue is one of reforming the mindset that exists, and this can only take place when the government of Pakistan and the state of Pakistan undertakes widespread education and awareness campaigns. I believe that yes, legislation does make a difference. Legislation is very important, but and so is enforcing legislation. But this with the blasphemy law, the first and foremost, most important thing is reforming hearts and minds, and that can only take place in a country like Pakistan, where the education rate and the literacy rate is so low. If the state takes it upon itself to actually educate people on the problems associated with this law, or how there is misuse and how it has to be prevented. And no amount of legislation and even a possible amendment cannot change how people are exploited in the name of religion. So first and foremost, there has to be an education and awareness campaign. The second most important issue is securing the right to due process and reforming the lower judiciary. Now, in 1993 or 1994, I'm sure a lot of people are aware of the Salamat Masih case, in which the late Mazari-Hazir defended a 13-year-old illiterate boy who had been convicted by the lower judiciary of blasphemy. He had been accused wrongfully of writing, and also baselessly, of writing derogatory and anti-Islamic remarks on the wall of a mosque. And he was kept in prison, detention, as most people who are accused of blasphemy are. And Asma Jahangir defended him before the Supreme Court, and he was eventually acquitted, because the Supreme Court asked, how is it possible that a boy who is illiterate has been convicted by the lower judiciary of chalking anti-Islamic sentiments on a wall when he can't read or write? And something very interesting that happened in that case as early as 1993 was that the Supreme Court had very intelligently asked 9 or 10 of the most senior lawyers in Pakistan to come and give their opinions on this case. And I think 8 out of 10 of those lawyers, discussed how there was no evidence linking Salamat Masih to the chalkings, or that the chalkings even existed, because the complainant in the case had wiped off the chalkings before making the allegation, which is actually considered hearsay in any civilized part of the world. And then he refused to even say what he had written, because that would have been considered blasphemy. Of course, Justice Arif Bhatti, who had acquitted him, was shot dead in his own chambers. Manzoor Masih, who was a co-accused, was killed outside the court before the trial even. And things like this are very common. Things like this are very widespread. And until there's reform of the lower judiciary, until police efficiency is improved, until there is stringent enforcement or some kind of punitive action for making false allegations, this kind of environment of fear will continue to result in exploitation of this law. And just recently, Pakistan has come under a lot of international pressure and fire for having this law in place to begin with. And while many religious fanatics and otherwise also people from the right wing get up and say that, well, this is Western pressure and this is a Western human rights agenda that is being imposed on Pakistan, the fact is that Pakistanis would perhaps be the first people to get up and say, if the same thing was happening to Muslims in any other part of the world, that this is mass exploitation and denial of fundamental rights. So how can we allow something like this to go on without any kind of accountability or movement towards reform in our country? This blasphemy law and its misuse by right-wing religious fanatics has not only been allowed, but it has actually been encouraged by the powers that be, because religion is a tool in Pakistan that has been used for several years to breed a culture of intolerance and fear. Perhaps this is one of the areas in which Pakistanis as a society have to really take a long, cold, hard look in the mirror and see the monsters that we've become. People are too scared to talk about this law because the last few people that talked about it were shot dead, one by his own personal security guard provided by the state. So I understand that people are scared. I've also been advised not to talk about this several times by my loved ones, by my very close friends and family. But I believe that there's no running away from this, and societies can only evolve if we get up and band together to talk about the issues, regardless of how scared we might be to talk about them. And it is because of this weapon of fear that we've seen no real change to anything with regard to this law in Pakistan, or to how it's misused, or punishments for people who make false allegations. Like 20 of the accused in the Mashal Khan case, they were acquitted by a court. So this kind of leniency towards people who misuse religion cannot be allowed anymore in our society. We just need to remember, really, it's very simple. Today it could be a Christian couple tossed into a brick kiln. Tomorrow it could be a Christian boy wrongly accused. But someday it's all of us, and really none of us are safe for as long as laws are allowed to operate with no evidence requirements, with no mens rea requirement, and with no punishments for those who wrongly take the law into their own hands or make false allegations because of some other property dispute or personal debate or argument. So really what I'm trying to say in very simple terms is that this is a very important issue that we need to talk about. I know that there is a fear that is surrounding it, but for how long are we going to allow fear to silence us? And how long are we going to allow injustice to exist within our society on such a huge scale with absolutely no consequences for those who are responsible for this mass injustice?